The Galactic Military Academy was a place of prestige, its name spoken with reverence across countless star systems. Nestled within the orbit of a massive gas giant, the Academy's sprawling station shimmered like a jewel in the darkness of space. Here, the brightest minds and most formidable warriors of the galaxy gathered to learn strategy, discipline, and the art of war. It was a melting pot of species, each bringing their unique strengths, technologies, and cultural philosophies. Yet, even in this hub of diversity, the arrival of humans caused a ripple. Humanity was a recent addition to the galactic fold. As Deathworlders, creatures born on a planet fraught with danger, unpredictable climates, and predators, they were viewed with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. The term Deathworlder carried both a grudging respect and a quiet disdain. To most of the other species, humans were primitive, overly reliant on instinct and luck, rather than logic and superior technology. It wasn't uncommon for whispers to echo through the Academy halls, questioning how such a species had managed to survive at all, let alone gain interstellar recognition. Among the human cadets was Lieutenant Mara Caldwell, a determined young officer with a sharp mind and a reputation for unorthodox thinking. She led a small team of 4 other humans, each handpicked for their resilience and creativity. Though they had endured the Academy's grueling physical trials and aced the intellectual exams, their presence was still met with skepticism. To the other cadets, they were anomalies, outsiders who didn't belong in the same ranks as the descendants of ancient, technologically advanced civilizations. The moment the humans set foot on the training deck, the whispers grew louder. A new simulation challenge had been announced: Scenario Zeta Prime, a battle scenario designed to be impossible. Its purpose wasn't victory but humility, to show cadets the importance of perseverance and teamwork in the face of inevitable failure. Over the decades, countless alien teams had tried and failed to crack its intricate mechanics. For many, the challenge became a rite of passage, a shared experience that bonded cadets of all species through the shared frustration of failure. The holographic briefing played in the main training hall, its shimmering display detailing the rules and objectives. The cadets gathered, their alien forms a riot of colors, shapes, and sizes. Mara and her team stood out in their simple gray uniforms, their expressions unreadable as the simulation parameters were explained. Scenario Zeta Prime is not designed to be won, announced the instructor, a towering insectoid being with iridescent wings. Its voice clicked and buzzed through the air, translated into galactic standard by the comm units embedded in every cadet's collar. It is a test of endurance and strategy, a way to understand your limitations. Victory is not the objective. Survival is. The crowd murmured in response, antennae twitching, tentacles curling, and frills rippling in what could only be interpreted as amusement. Survival, the humans thought, was something they excelled at. The simulation was simple in concept: a hostile environment filled with enemy forces, limited resources, and an escalating series of challenges. Cadets would lead their teams through the scenario, navigating deadly terrain, managing dwindling supplies, and fending off relentless waves of adversaries. Success was measured by how long a team could survive before being overwhelmed. Mara's eyes narrowed as she studied the hologram. She could already see the flaws in the design, the small details that alien teams likely overlooked. Alien cadets, she reasoned, would approach the challenge with their typical reliance on overwhelming firepower or advanced technologies. Humans, on the other hand, had been surviving impossible odds for millennia using ingenuity and sheer stubbornness. As the cadets dispersed to prepare, Mara's team huddled together in one corner of the hall. Their quiet determination was a stark contrast to the boastful confidence of the other groups. "This isn't just a test," Mara said, her voice low but firm. "It's a statement. If we fail like everyone else, we'll confirm every bias they have about us. But if we succeed..." She let the thought hang in the air, letting the weight of their potential victory settle over the group. The others nodded in agreement. They knew the stakes were higher for them than for anyone else. When their turn came to enter the simulation chamber, the humans walked in with quiet resolve. The chamber itself was massive, its walls lined with advanced holographic projectors that could create hyper-realistic environments. As the simulation booted up, the room transformed into a desolate wasteland, a barren expanse of jagged rocks under a blood-red sky. In the distance, towering spires of alien architecture loomed, their surfaces crawling with enemy drones. The air was thick with dust, and the sound of distant explosions echoed across the landscape. The humans' HUDs lit up with mission parameters and resource indicators. A quick glance told them everything they needed to know: limited ammunition, sparse medical supplies, and no reinforcements. The simulation wasted no time, throwing the first wave of enemies at them almost immediately. Small, insect-like drones swarmed over the horizon, their metallic bodies glinting in the red light. "Remember the plan," Mara said, her voice steady as she gripped her weapon. "Conserve ammo, use the terrain, and stay unpredictable." Her team moved with precision, their years of training evident in every step. They used the jagged rocks for cover, picking off drones with well-placed shots and setting traps with the few explosives they had. When the enemy numbers grew overwhelming, they retreated deeper into the wasteland, luring the drones into choke points where they could be easily dispatched. The first wave was defeated, but the humans knew better than to celebrate. The simulation escalated quickly, throwing larger and more dangerous enemies into the mix. The humans adapted on the fly, using the environment to their advantage and crafting makeshift weapons from the debris scattered across the battlefield. Their ingenuity baffled the alien observers, who watched from the control room with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. By the time the second wave ended, the humans had already lasted longer than most teams. The alien cadets who had mocked them earlier were now silent, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright awe. The instructors, too, were taking notice, their antennae twitching in what could only be described as nervous energy. But Mara and her team weren't done yet. They knew that the real test was still to come: the final wave, a relentless onslaught designed to break even the most resilient teams. As the simulation prepared to launch its final assault, Mara's mind raced, analyzing every possible scenario and calculating the odds. The chances of survival were slim, but that had never stopped humanity before. For the humans, this wasn't just a simulation. It was a battle for respect, a chance to prove that they belonged among the stars, and they were determined to win. The control room was abuzz with quiet conversations and hushed astonishment as Mara Caldwell and her team systematically dismantled the second wave of the Scenario Zeta Prime simulation. Instructors exchanged glances, their usually stoic expressions betraying hints of surprise. This was uncharted territory. No team had lasted this long, let alone shown such ingenuity in adapting to the simulation's challenges. Mara and her team were oblivious to the commotion outside the simulation chamber. Their focus was razor-sharp, every movement deliberate, every decision calculated. The environment shifted as the second wave ended, the jagged wasteland morphing into an abandoned alien cityscape. Tall, crumbling structures stretched into the blood-red sky, their surfaces marked with centuries of erosion and decay. The eerie silence was punctuated only by the distant hum of approaching threats. As her team regrouped, Mara crouched behind a fallen pillar, her eyes scanning the new terrain. The holographic display on her wrist flickered, showing dwindling resources. Only a handful of ammunition clips, 2 medkits, and a single explosive charge remained. Their supplies were critically low, and the next wave would undoubtedly be harder. She knew they couldn't rely on brute force to survive. They needed a plan, something unconventional, something the simulation's algorithms wouldn't expect. "Status check," Mara called out, her voice calm but commanding. "Ammo's almost gone," muttered Finn, the team's weapons specialist, as he loaded his last clip into his rifle. "We've got maybe 2 minutes of sustained fire left." 2 medkits. "But they're basic," added Quinn, the team's medic. "Not enough for anything serious." "And 1 charge," chimed in Elena, their demolitions expert, holding up the small explosive device. "We'll need to use it wisely." Mara nodded, absorbing the information. Her mind worked quickly, piecing together a strategy. She turned to Matteo, their tech specialist, who had been tinkering with a salvaged enemy drone. "What's the status on that?" she asked. Matteo grinned, holding up the repurposed device. "I've reprogrammed it to scout for us. It's not much, but it'll give us a heads up on what's coming." "Good. Send it out. We need intel." The drone buzzed to life, its tiny thrusters glowing as it zipped into the air. It disappeared into the maze of crumbling buildings, its camera feed displaying on Matteo's wrist screen. The team watched intently as the drone navigated the terrain, revealing enemy patrols and potential choke points. "Looks like they're coming from 3 directions," Matteo reported, his voice tense. Heavy infantry on the east side, aerial drones to the west, and something big heading straight for us from the north. Something big was an understatement. The blurry feed from the drone showed a hulking, quadrupedal machine bristling with weapons. Its metallic body glinted ominously as it stomped through the city, leaving destruction in its wake. The team exchanged uneasy glances. "That thing's designed to break us," Finn muttered. "No way we can take it head-on." Mara didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the map displayed on her wrist, her mind racing. She knew the simulation's algorithms were adaptive, designed to escalate based on the team's performance. If they had made it this far, it meant the system was pulling out all the stops to defeat them. But that also meant it was predictable, at least to a point. "We're not taking it head-on," Mara said finally, her voice firm. "We're going to outthink it." The team leaned in as Mara outlined her plan. They would divide their efforts, using the city's layout to their advantage. Mateo's reprogrammed drone would lead the aerial drones on a wild chase through the narrow streets, drawing them away from the main battle. Finn and Elena would set traps in the eastern sector, creating a kill zone for the heavy infantry. Meanwhile, Mara and Quinn would focus on the quadrupedal machine, using the last explosive charge to disable its primary weapon systems. "Timing is everything," Mara stressed. "If we're off by even a few seconds, this whole thing falls apart." The team nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had faced impossible odds before, and they trusted Mara's leadership. Without another word, they moved into position, their movements precise and silent. The city's oppressive atmosphere seemed to press down on them as they prepared for the next wave. Mateo's drone zipped through the air, its small frame darting between buildings as it baited the aerial drones. The feed showed the enemy drones pursuing it relentlessly, their sleek bodies glinting in the red light. Mateo guided the drone expertly, leading the enemies into a narrow alleyway where they collided in a fiery explosion. The sound echoed through the city, signaling the first phase of the plan's success. On the eastern front, Finn and Elena waited in the shadows as the heavy infantry approached. The enemy soldiers were towering figures clad in advanced armor, their footsteps reverberating through the ground. Finn's hands tightened around his rifle as he counted the seconds. When the first soldier stepped into the kill zone, he opened fire, his shots precise and deadly. Elena detonated a trap, sending shrapnel flying and taking out several enemies at once. The rest of the infantry scattered, disoriented by the sudden attack. Finn and Elena used the chaos to their advantage, picking off the remaining soldiers one by one. Meanwhile, Mara and Quinn faced the quadrupedal machine. It was an imposing sight, its massive frame blotting out the horizon as it advanced. Mara's heart pounded as she signaled Quinn to move into position. The two of them darted between cover, staying out of sight as the machine's sensors scanned the area. "Now," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. Quinn hurled a decoy device into the open, drawing the machine's attention. As it turned toward the distraction, Mara sprinted forward, the explosive charge clutched tightly in her hand. She reached the machine's underbelly and planted the charge with seconds to spare. The explosion rocked the city, disabling the machine's main weapons and leaving it vulnerable. But the battle was far from over. The machine roared to life, its secondary systems activating as it charged toward Mara. She dove out of the way just in time, the ground shaking beneath her as the machine crashed into a building. Quinn pulled her to safety, his face pale but determined. Phase 2. Mara gasped, her mind already racing with new calculations. The team regrouped as the simulation adapted once again, the environment shifting to present new challenges. They were battered and exhausted, their supplies almost gone. But as they stood together, their resolve unshaken, they knew one thing for certain: the simulation wasn't unbeatable. It was flawed. And they were going to prove it. The simulation chamber rumbled as the terrain shifted once more, the alien cityscape dissolving into a barren, volcanic wasteland. Rivers of molten lava snaked across the ground, casting an ominous red glow against the darkened sky. The air shimmered with heat, and the distant sound of roaring engines echoed across the expanse. Mara Caldwell and her team stood at the edge of the new battlefield, battered but resolute. The system was adapting rapidly now, escalating the challenge to an unprecedented level. In the control room, the alien instructors watched in tense silence, their usually impassive faces betraying flickers of disbelief. The humans had already surpassed every record set by other cadets, surviving far longer than anyone thought possible. Yet the simulation was designed to break even the most resilient teams, and the algorithms were recalibrating to exploit every possible weakness. Mara's mind raced as she analyzed the new terrain. The rivers of lava created natural choke points, but the ground was treacherous, littered with unstable rock formations that could collapse at any moment. Their dwindling resources left little room for error, and the team's exhaustion was evident in their heavy breathing and sluggish movements. But they were still alive, and that was enough. "Status report," Mara said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Ammo count is critical," Finn replied, shaking his nearly empty rifle. "We've got maybe a handful of shots left between us." "Medical supplies are gone," Quinn added grimly. "If anyone goes down now, there's no getting back up." Matteo glanced at his wrist display, his face pale. "I've lost the drone feed. Whatever's coming next, we're blind." Mara nodded, her expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of her team's trust pressing down on her shoulders. Failure wasn't an option not just because of the simulation, but because of what it represented. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about proving that humanity belonged here, among the stars, as equals. A distant rumble interrupted her thoughts, growing louder with each passing second. The ground trembled as a massive vehicle emerged from the horizon, a towering war machine bristling with weaponry and shielded by a shimmering energy field. It was a mobile fortress, a final boss designed to crush any remaining hope of survival. "Great," Finn muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "They've sent a damn tank." "It's not just a tank," Matteo corrected, his eyes glued to his wrist display. "It's a fortress. That thing's got anti-air, ground assault, and probably self-repair capabilities." Mara frowned, her mind already working through the problem. The fortress was too heavily armored for their remaining weapons to penetrate, and its energy shield would make even their most creative tactics nearly useless. But every system had a flaw, and she was determined to find it. "Quinn, find us some high ground," she said, her voice firm. "We need a vantage point to get a better look at that thing." Quinn scanned the terrain, his sharp eyes spotting a craggy outcrop overlooking the battlefield. The team moved quickly, navigating the unstable ground with care. The heat was oppressive, sweat dripping down their faces as they climbed to the top. From their new position, they could see the full scale of the fortress, a behemoth of metal and fire, its weapons scanning the battlefield for targets. Mara crouched behind a boulder, studying the fortress through the scope of her rifle. She could see the faint hum of its energy shield, the pulsing core at its center, and the rotating cannons that bristled along its sides. It was a masterpiece of destructive engineering, and she hated it. "There," she said, pointing to a section of the fortress's undercarriage. "That's where the shield generator is. If we can disable it, we might have a chance." "And how do you propose we get close enough to do that?" Finn asked, his tone skeptical. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked to the terrain below, noting the rivers of lava and the precarious rock formations. The environment was hostile, but it could also be an ally if they used it correctly. "We lure it into the lava fields," she said finally. "Force it to follow us into unstable terrain. If we can get it to a weak point, we might be able to use its own weight against it." The team exchanged uneasy glances. It was a risky plan, but they didn't have any better options. With a nod, they set their plan into motion. Matteo took the lead, his tech skills allowing him to hack into a nearby terminal and create a distraction. Sparks flew as the terminal overloaded, drawing the fortress's attention. Its massive cannons turned toward the disturbance, unleashing a barrage of firepower that shook the ground. "Move," Mara shouted, leading her team down the slope and into the lava fields. The fortress rumbled after them, its massive treads crushing everything in their path. The ground beneath their feet was unstable, the heat intense, but they pressed on, weaving between the molten rivers and jagged rocks. The fortress followed, its weapons firing relentlessly. Explosions erupted around them, sending showers of rock and lava into the air. The team moved with practiced precision, their years of training allowing them to stay one step ahead of the destruction. As they neared the weakest section of the terrain, Mara signaled for the team to split up. Finn and Elena moved to the left, creating additional distractions to keep the fortress focused on them. Mateo and Quinn stayed with Mara, their eyes scanning the ground for the perfect spot to spring their trap. There, Mara shouted, pointing to a narrow bridge of rock spanning a river of lava. It was their best chance if they could get the fortress to cross it. The unstable ground might give way under its weight. Mateo worked quickly, setting up a series of makeshift charges along the bridge. The team held their breath as the fortress rumbled closer, its massive frame casting a shadow over the battlefield. It was almost too big to comprehend, a looming reminder of their fragility. As the fortress began to cross the bridge, Mara gave the signal. Mateo detonated the charges, sending a shockwave through the ground. The bridge shuddered, cracks spreading rapidly as the weight of the fortress became too much. With a deafening roar, the ground gave way, and the fortress plunged into the lava below. The team watched in stunned silence as the fortress was consumed by fire, its energy shield flickering and dying. The simulation's alarms blared, signaling the end of the scenario. They had done it, they had beaten the impossible. Mara sank to her knees, exhaustion washing over her. The others joined her, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. For a moment, none of them spoke, the enormity of their accomplishments settling over them. In the control room, the alien instructors were silent, their disbelief mirrored by the cadets watching from the observation deck. Humanity had done the unthinkable, defying not only the simulation but the expectations of the galaxy itself. As the simulation chamber powered down, the holographic terrain dissolved into a featureless gray void. The oppressive heat of the volcanic wasteland vanished, replaced by the cool, sterile air of the training facility. Mara Caldwell stood still in the center of the room, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Around her, the rest of her team slumped to the floor, their exhaustion palpable. Sweat dripped from their brows, their uniforms tattered and scorched, but there was an unmistakable gleam of triumph in their eyes. The sound of the chamber door hissing open drew their attention. A group of alien instructors filed in, their towering forms backlit by the harsh white light of the hallway beyond. Their faces, if they could be called, that were unreadable, a mixture of bioluminescent markings and rigid, insectoid features. The lead instructor, a tall insectoid being with shimmering iridescent wings, stepped forward, its mandibles clicking in a way that suggested agitation. Mara straightened, forcing herself to stand despite the burning ache in her muscles. She could feel the weight of the instructor's gaze, its multifaceted eyes scanning her and her team with an intensity that was almost suffocating. Behind them, a crowd of alien cadets had gathered in the observation deck, their faces pressed against the glass as they strained to catch a glimpse of the humans who had defied the impossible. "Lieutenant Caldwell," the instructor began, its voice a strange blend of clicks and buzzing, translated into galactic standard by the comm units embedded in their collars. "You and your team have completed the scenario Zeta Prime simulation, a feat that was, by all accounts, considered unattainable." Mara said nothing, her expression carefully neutral. She knew better than to show weakness, especially now when the eyes of the entire academy were on them. Instead, she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. The instructor's mandibles twitched in what might have been irritation or perhaps something else entirely. "This is unprecedented," it continued. "The simulation is designed to be unwinnable, to teach perseverance and humility in the face of overwhelming odds. Your victory raises questions." "Questions?" Mara repeated, her voice steady despite the fatigue that threatened to drag her down. "About what?" The instructor paused, its wings fluttering slightly. "About whether the parameters of the simulation were flawed, or whether your methods were outside the intended scope." A flicker of irritation crossed Mara's face, but she quickly suppressed it. She could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. They couldn't accept that humans' Deathworlders had outsmarted their vaunted simulation. It wasn't just about the simulation itself, it was about what it represented. Humanity's success challenged the carefully constructed hierarchy of the galaxy, a hierarchy that had always placed humans near the bottom. "With all due respect," Mara said, her voice calm but firm, "we played by your rules. We used the tools and resources available to us, just as the simulation intended. If our methods were unconventional, that's because we're trained to think that way. Survival on Earth isn't about following a script, it's about adapting to the unexpected. The instructor tilted its head, its antennae twitching as if considering her words. Behind it, the other instructors exchanged glances, their own body language betraying uncertainty. The crowd in the observation deck was silent, their eyes fixed on the scene below. Finally, the instructor stepped back, its wings folding neatly against its back. "Your performance will be reviewed," it said, its tone more measured now. "But for now, your team's success will be recorded as the first victory in Scenario Zeta Prime." Mara allowed herself a small sigh of relief, though she remained outwardly composed. She could feel the eyes of her team on her, their unspoken gratitude for standing up to the scrutiny of the instructors. As the group was led out of the simulation chamber, the murmurs from the observation deck grew louder, a cacophony of curiosity and disbelief. Once they were back in the barracks, the tension finally broke. Finn let out a whoop of triumph, collapsing onto one of the bunks with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "Did you see their faces?" he said, his voice filled with laughter. They couldn't believe it. "We actually did it." Elena slumped into a chair, her own exhaustion tempered by a sense of pride. "I thought we were done for back there," she admitted. "That fortress. I've never seen anything like it." Matteo leaned against the wall, his arms crossed as he stared at the floor. "They're going to analyze every second of that simulation," he said. "Probably rewrite the whole thing to make sure no one else ever wins it again." "Let them," Mara said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. She stood near the window, staring out at the endless expanse of stars beyond the station. "We didn't just beat the simulation. We proved something to them, and to ourselves." Quinn looked up from where he was tending to a cut on his arm. "And what's that?" "That we belong here," Mara said simply. "They've underestimated us from the start, but now they know what we're capable of. We've set the bar, and no matter what they do, they can't erase that." The room fell silent as her words sank in. It wasn't just about the victory, it was about the message it sent. Humanity was no longer an afterthought in the galactic community, a species dismissed as primitive and unpredictable. They had earned their place, not through brute force or advanced technology, but through ingenuity, resilience, and sheer determination. As the days passed, the ripple effects of their victory became evident. Alien cadets who once avoided the humans now approached them with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Questions were asked, not in mocking tones but with genuine interest. Instructors, too, seemed to view them differently, their critiques tempered by a newfound recognition of humanity's potential. But not everyone was pleased. Whispers of dissent circulated through the academy, voices that resented the humans for upsetting the established order. Mara knew that their victory had made them as many enemies as it had allies. Yet she also knew that they had taken the first step in carving out a place for humanity among the stars. One evening, as Mara sat alone in the observation deck, staring out at the vastness of space, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see the lead instructor, its iridescent wings catching the light. "You've changed things," it said, its voice softer than she had ever heard it before. "That was the idea," Mara replied, her tone guarded. The instructor was silent for a moment, its antennae twitching slightly. "Change is not easy," it said finally, "but it is often necessary. Your species has potential, Lieutenant Caldwell. Do not waste it." With that, it turned and walked away, leaving Mara alone with her thoughts. She gazed out at the stars, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and resistance. But for the first time, she felt a spark of hope, a belief that humanity's place among the stars was not only possible but inevitable. They had defied the impossible, and in doing so, they had rewritten the rules. The galaxy would never be the same,